My name is Vanessa Cole. I was 32 years old, and at every family gathering for the past decade, my parents introduced my sister as the one who made them proud, and introduced me by explaining why I wasn't there. I was always the disappointment, the one who left home with 2 bags and no plan, the one my father said would come crawling back inside a year. I never came back. And then, one morning, my mother turned on the news. For 11 years, my family believed I was drifting. Seasonal work, cheap apartments, a life assembled from whatever I could find. My sister Rachel had the house 4 blocks from my parents, the framed degrees on the wall, the husband my mother had approved, the children photographed every Christmas. She was what the family pointed at when they needed evidence that they had done something right. I was what they pointed at when they needed a warning. I let them believe what they believed because explaining the truth would have required trusting people who had never once given me a reason to. I am the founder and sole owner of a crisis logistics company, a firm that designs emergency infrastructure systems for municipalities, hospitals, and federal contractors. We have 61 employees. We hold active government contracts in 7 states. My name appears on federal vendor registries and emergency management white papers, but not in places my family ever thought to look. I built it from a rented desk in a shared office space with a second-hand laptop and $12,000 I had saved across 3 years of working night shifts while studying for my certifications during the day. My parents called those years the lost years. They were the only years that ever mattered. I want to tell you what happened the morning my mother saw my name on the news, but first I have to tell you what happened the night I left, because the 2 moments are connected in a way I did not fully understand until everything was already over. I was 21. My father had just finished telling a room full of relatives that Rachel had been accepted into a graduate program on a full scholarship. The room applauded. My mother cried. My father gave a small speech about sacrifice and investment and what a family could achieve when a child applied herself. I was in the room. I had that week received a certification in emergency systems planning, something I had studied for across 18 months while working 2 jobs. I had paid for the exam myself. I had told no one because telling people in my family that you were attempting something meant enduring their commentary on your likelihood of failing it. My father did not mention me in the speech. My mother did not look at me during it. My aunt asked me quietly afterward whether I had thought about going back to school. I went home, packed what fit in 2 bags, and left a note on the kitchen counter that said, "I'll be fine, don't worry." My mother told relatives I had stormed out over jealousy. My father said I had seen it coming. Rachel called me 3 weeks later to tell me, gently, that everyone agreed I needed to get the bitterness out of my system and come home when I was ready to be reasonable. I had not been bitter, I had been invisible. There is a difference, and it matters, and almost no one in a family like mine ever learns it. Have you ever walked away from people who were supposed to love you, not in anger, but in a kind of quiet certainty that staying would cost you something you couldn't afford to lose? Tell me in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how many people are sitting with that same weight tonight. I did not contact my family for 2 years, not out of cruelty, out of necessity. Every time I had previously tried to describe what I was building, my father found a way to reframe it as delusion. My mother would say she was worried. Rachel would listen carefully and then repeat what I'd said at the dinner table in a tone that made it sound unstable. The only safe version of me in that household was the version that had not yet tried anything.
So I tried things in private. The first contract my company won was a small emergency communication protocol review for a county health department in a state none of my family had ever visited. It paid $34,000. I stood in my apartment kitchen and read the signed agreement 4 times. Then I sat down on the floor because my legs weren't cooperating. I hired my first employee 8 months later, a logistics coordinator named Darnell who had more field experience than I did, and who, in the interview, said he'd rather work for a small company that took the work seriously than a large one that treated emergency planning as a budget line. He has been with me for 9 years. He runs our field operations now. The company grew the way real things grow. Slowly, with setbacks, with contracts that fell through and bids that lost, and one terrible year where I made payroll by deferring my own salary for 4 months. I told no one about the hard stretches because I had no one to tell who wouldn't have used it as confirmation. I maintained a minimal public profile deliberately. In my industry, reputation travels through referral networks and federal procurement circles, not press coverage. I did not seek attention. I sought contracts. For a long time, that was enough. Then a bridge failed. In the early morning hours on a Tuesday in March, a pedestrian bridge in a mid-sized city 3 hours from where I grew up partially collapsed. 14 people were injured. The city's emergency coordination infrastructure, the systems meant to route responders, communicate with hospitals, and manage traffic diversion, failed within the first 20 minutes because 3 separate departments were operating on incompatible platforms. My firm had submitted a proposal to that city 2 years ago, recommending exactly the kind of integrated communication system that would have prevented the coordination failure. The proposal had been declined for budget reasons. When the crisis hit, the city's emergency manager, a woman named Helen Price, who had worked with one of my federal contacts, called my firm directly. We had a field team on the ground within 6 hours, providing coordination support. We helped with store communication routing between the fire department, 3 hospitals, and the regional transit authority in under 4 hours. Helen spoke to the press that evening. She named my company. She described what we had built and how it had functioned under pressure. She said, in the specific, careful language of someone choosing words for public record, "This is exactly the kind of infrastructure we should have invested in 2 years ago. We didn't, and we paid for it. Fortunately, we had a partner who showed up anyway." A regional news station ran the segment. Then a national outlet picked it up. Then 2 others. My company's name was in the headline. My name was in the second paragraph. My mother watches the morning news with coffee every single day. She has done it for 30 years. She called my cell phone at 7:14 in the morning. I was already in a coordination call with Helen's team and let it go to voicemail. She called again at 7:31. Then my father called at 7:45, the first time he had dialed my number in 4 years. I finished the coordination call, reviewed 3 status reports, and approved a staffing update for the field team before I listened to the voicemails. My mother's first message said my name and then went quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We saw the news. We didn't know. Call us when you can." Her second message said, "Your father and I are very proud of you. We always knew you had it in you. We just want you to know that." My father's message was 20 seconds long. He said he'd seen the segment. He said the company sounded impressive. He said family was important, and he hoped I hadn't forgotten that. Then he said he'd like to talk, at my convenience, and that he hoped I was well. I set my phone down. I looked out the window of my office for a moment. Then I went back to work. My sister called 4 days later. Rachel's call was longer. She was warm and familiar in the way she always was, the particular warmth of someone who has spent a lifetime being the one people are glad to hear from, so warmth has become automatic. She asked how I was. She said she had always believed in me. She said Mom and Dad talked about me more than I probably knew. I asked her what they said. She paused. "They worried about you." I asked if there was a difference in their house between worrying about someone and being disappointed in them. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said that they hadn't understood what I was doing, that they hadn't had enough information. I told her that was accurate. She said she hoped we could all move forward. She said that what I had built was remarkable, and that she had told her husband and her kids about it, and they were all so impressed.
She said the word impressed with a particular brightness, the way you describe something that has exceeded your expectations, and I heard underneath it the original expectation, the floor she had started from, the version of me she had been carrying all along. I told her I appreciated the call. I did not tell her what I was thinking, which was this: that for 11 years my family had held a story about me so tightly that they had never once checked whether it was true, that my mother could watch a news segment and feel proud, genuinely proud. The pride she described was real, I do not doubt that, and feel no particular discomfort about the 11 years she had spent describing me as someone who couldn't be relied on. That pride and accountability could coexist so seamlessly in their minds that no one felt the need to name the gap between them. I had not built my company to prove something to them, but sitting there, I understood for the first time the full shape of what they had cost me. Not the success, I had built that without them, but the years I had spent so carefully silent, the contracts I celebrated alone, the hard months I navigated without anyone to call, the specific exhaustion of building something real while the people who were supposed to know you best had already decided what you were. That was the cost, and it was real, and no news segment changes it. 2 weeks after the coverage, I received a handwritten letter from my father, 4 pages in his precise architect's handwriting. He described watching the segment. He described a feeling he called recognition, that something he had seen in me when I was very young had apparently been real, and he was sorry he had not named it while it would have mattered. He used the word sorry twice, both times followed immediately by an explanation of what he believed at the time and why it had seemed reasonable. That is a specific kind of apology, the kind that arrives already defended, the kind where the person who gives it needs you to understand as part of receiving it why they were not entirely wrong to do what they did. I read all 4 pages. I set the letter on my desk. I thought about what I wanted from him, what I had wanted at 21, standing in that room while everyone applauded Rachel's news and no one looked at me. I had wanted to be seen, not celebrated, just seen, to exist in their accounting of the family as someone who was actually there. I wrote back, 2 paragraphs. I told him I had received his letter and that I appreciated him writing it. I told him I was well and that the company was entering a strong period. I told him if he wanted to talk, I was open to it, and that I thought we should take it slowly. I did not forgive him in the letter, because forgiveness, real forgiveness, is not something you produce on request. It is something that happens, or doesn't, in its own time, at its own pace, on terms that belong to the person who was hurt. I am still working on that. I think I will be for a while, and I have decided that is acceptable. My company now holds contracts in 9 states. We have expanded into long-term infrastructure planning for regional hospital networks. Darnell runs field operations. My head of contracts, a woman named Simone I hired in year 3, has turned down 2 offers from firms 3 times our size because she says the work is better where she is. I have an office with windows. I have a team I trust. I have built something that functions, that actually works under pressure when it matters, and the proof of that is in the record, not in what anyone says about it. My parents came to visit once 6 months after the news coverage. My mother walked through the office quietly. She stopped at the wall where we keep the project maps, visual records of every project, every coordination network we've built, the physical geography of 11 years of work. She stood there for a long time. She said, "I didn't know." I told her I knew you didn't. She said, "She should have." I didn't answer that, not because I was punishing her, I genuinely was not, but because I didn't have anything to say yet that was both honest and kind. Sometimes you haven't yet found the sentence that holds both things at once. Silence is more respectful than a word you don't mean. My father shook hands with Darnell and asked him detailed questions about field deployment logistics for 20 minutes. Darnell told me afterward that my father had seemed surprised that I had built something with that level of operational depth. Did he seem proud? I asked. Darnell considered it. He seemed like he was doing math, he said, like he was recalculating something. That is probably the most accurate description of my father I have ever heard from someone who just met him. I do not tell this story because it ends with a reconciliation. It does not yet, possibly not ever in the form that the word usually implies. I do not tell it because I want credit for what I built. The contracts and the clients and the field deployments are the credit. They exist, they function, they speak in a language that does not require anyone's approval to be real. I tell it because of the 11 years. Because of the silence I kept not out of shame but out of self-preservation, and how those two things can look identical from the outside. Because of the night I packed 2 bags and left a note, and everyone agreed I was running from something, and I was the only one who knew I was running towards something. Because of every person watching this right now who is in the middle of their own quiet years, building something in a space no one in their family has bothered to look at yet. You don't need them to look. You need to keep building. The validation, if it ever comes, will arrive when the work is already done. It will feel less like vindication than you imagined, and more like a very clear view of everything that came before it. That view is useful. It is not comfortable. Comfort was never really the point. My name is Vanessa Cole. My parents gave my sister everything and called me the disappointment. I left with 2 bags and 11 years of silence. Then my mother turned on the morning news. By the time she called, I had already been back at work for an hour. The work was never waiting for her to notice it. It was only ever waiting for me to do it.